What's up guys? So we got some great news with the Snezhnaya reveal. Genshin have announced that they are updating the Constellation event To Temper Thyself, and they've decided to add a bunch of Fontaine era characters and Mizuki, which as we'll get into is a mix of characters who have been recently buffed like Wriothesley and Mizuki, along with older characters who may not be quite as relevant to you at the moment unless you really like playing them. Also, very importantly, they have teased some off-field stellar reaction characters next patch, including the Cryo Traveler and Adept. And on top of that, they did tease Stellar Swell, which does mean the new additions, Wriothesley, Mizuki, along with Sino, who's already been added, all three of these should now have proper stellar reaction teams. First of all, there are a few disclaimers. Number one, maybe the most important disclaimer is, I think at this point, reading this, it is 99% confirmed that you cannot pick the same character again. Furthermore, in the event calendar, they do specifically say the 5th cycle of To Temper Thyself, so they're not saying year 2. So I can't say we're 100% sure just yet because a lot of this is based on Chinese wording that they translate, so we have to see in game, but I think it's basically 99% confirmed. So what that means is you picked your 4 buffed characters last year. Me personally, I picked Albedo C1, Nilou C1, I finished off my Mona C6, and just recently I got the very powerful Yamiko C1. And that does mean this year 99% chance you'll have to pick 4 new characters. Second thing to note is they didn't add 3 Fontaine characters, which you might have expected. Farina's not added, Nevilet's not added, and Arlecchino is not added. Point number 3, I think we just don't need to panic at all, and that's because it's very easily possible for your plans to change throughout the year. For example, when this first came out with the original characters, Klee and Albedo weren't actually buffed yet. So me personally, I ended up pivoting towards the end of that first batch and ended up getting Albedo C1, and I wouldn't have had Albedo C1 in my plans at all at the beginning. They will probably add more buffs throughout the year, like maybe a Dendro buff for a Dendro cryo reaction meta, and you might end up picking Emily or Baiju or Tainari. So this means, in my opinion, as long as you can see maybe 2 characters that you're dead set on picking this year, then that's completely fine. Don't think too much about the future. And with that being said, you're wondering, can I help you decide what constellations you might want to get? So I made a very simple cheat sheet. This is not a constellation tier list, but basically it comes down to there's a mix of characters who have good early constellations, but some characters have been buffed and have modern teams, and some characters haven't been buffed yet, fingers crossed. And if you don't want to think too hard about the numbers, it really does hold true, because buffed characters not only have been buffed to be stronger, but they got buffed to fit in well with modern archetypes like Stellar Conduct or Hexarai teams. And not only that, but their constellations also get a lot of buffs, which is very important because a lot of these older characters, most older characters didn't really have that great constellation scaling. Constellations get stronger year on year, so the characters that have been buffed and have got their constellations increased to a more modern level, they're generally going to be in a way better position than older characters who haven't got buffed, just because these constellations are from an era where constellations weren't quite as strong, even if they have some good ones. This is what makes Yamiko so good to get here, and it's why everyone was in a frenzy to get her last event. Now, I don't want to focus too much on the older characters here. I think a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory at this point, but the main focus is going to be on these higher ones here, which are the buffed characters. Specifically, Wriothesley and Mizuki. I think out of all the new additions, most people probably should be leaning towards picking one of those 2 for the first event. All these characters around here, their C1s and C2s are generally around 15%, sometimes up to 20% damage upgrade depending on your assumptions. I've gone through Klee's constellations in an old video. I also went through Yamiko's C1 in a previous video. A lot of these characters upgrades are generally around that 15-20% range, except for Wriothesley. His constellations got big changes, and his C1 is nothing too special, but his C2 is now massive. This got a complete rework, and essentially now it increases his stellar conduct hits by 50% of their original multipliers. So his stellar conduct hits, instead of doing 60 or 80%, now do 50% more. So 90 or 120. And this 100% multiplier now does 150%. These multiplier increases basically is just 50% more damage. Obviously not all of his damage is going to be stellar conduct. My rough calculations are putting this at over a 40% increase, which might be the strongest early constellation in this entire event. And this is super relevant because a lot of Wriothesley mains already got him up to C1 years ago. So with him being added now, a lot of you should just immediately just snipe this C2. Just quickly going through some of the other buff characters. I'm personally on Mizuki C1, so I could get her C2. Both of these are very good. Mizuki, even though she got buffed, she doesn't really have teams now, but they did tease the Stellar Swirl reaction, which Mizuki will be a part of, which means she should have teams. And even though she's standard, I'm expecting her to be very interesting and good to play. I'll probably make a video on Stellar Swirl in the near future. And then there's other characters who are not new, but they were buffed. Sino C1 giving 200 EM, which is very good, and stellar damage to his hits. Both of these should be around that 15% damage range. So if you're a Sino main, then feel free to pick these up. Let's also quickly talk about some of the new additions that haven't been buffed. For example, Navia. I'm a big fan of Navia. I've played her a lot, made a lot of videos. However, her constellations haven't changed. These are not very good at all. Sadly, in the Fontaine era, she probably has some of the weaker C1s and C2s. Even this C2, it's not bad. It gives you up to 36% crit rate. But in order to utilize that, you have to build 36% less crit rate, which means if you want to increase the damage of her skill, you're taking away from her other hits. There's Chiori, who I also really like, and I got her C1. The advantage of this C1 was that it let her work with Geo teammates that didn't have constructs. But the thing is, now with Lunar Crystallized teams, Lunar Crystallized basically counts as a Geo construct. So in a lot of modern teams, it basically doesn't really do anything. Clorinde, I also really like and have played a lot. But she hasn't received buffs. However, her C1 and C2 are pretty good. If I remember correctly, this C1 is maybe 15% damage increase. This C2 maybe 20. So they're within that range of good constellations, but she just doesn't have a buff. So if Clorinde does get buffed this year and they even slightly improve this C1 and C2, then those would be very good. Similar story with Emily. I have Emily C1 and her C1 and C2 are pretty good. This C2 gives Dendro Shred, but you don't really play her in modern teams either. So if she does get buffed, that could be a good option. If you're a really dedicated Kenichi main, then that could be an option. Linny's similar to Clorinde, very standard DPS cons, but he hasn't been buffed. Sejun, her C1 and C2 fully enhance how you play her. The C1 increases her buffs, and the C2 has the Hydro Res Shred. So those are also very good with her. Same problem as the other characters though. You probably aren't playing her in a ton of teams. And a similar scenario with Shenun as well. Her C1 and C2 are very good. The C1 gives her extra skill charge, which is very good in exploration and also good for generating energy. And her C2 just increases her buffs by a ton. So those are also technically good constellations in plunge teams. You probably aren't playing a modern plunge team. So again, if she does get buffs, then those could be good constellations. So just wanted to make this short video for a cheat sheet to help you get some early ideas. Remember, don't panic. Your plans will almost certainly change throughout the year. So just have a think about 1 or 2 characters who you really want to get. And don't worry too much about all 4 characters. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. And feel free to have some discussion in the comments. Thanks guys. Cheers.